hearing just that small bit of his voice right there, I just felt, my chest tighten, my heart just sort of feels strained. Protein phobia from another charlatan online.
There is no evidence whatsoever that excess protein is good for you.
Well, there's no evidence that anything's good for you, but also who's saying to eat protein in excess, because excess is beyond what's required and beyond what's indicated. No one's saying that. No one's sensible. And if anyone is saying that, you should discard what they're saying. You should disregard anything that they're saying.
Enough proteins, but not excess protein.
Right, enough, sufficient for your requirements and in the indicated amounts, according to what your genes are most evolved to genotypically withstand. So also from the foods that your genes are most evolved to genotypically withstand. Good. I'm glad that we've gotten that out of the way. This is Walter Longo, by the way, someone who says that epidemiology is one of the major pillars of health. So, anyway.
It's scary, the breast cancer, the colorectal cancer occurring earliest. Advertisement, and even podcasters talking about.
All right, so that was just a picture of Ken Berry and I can't remember her name at the top of my head. Lyon is her last name. Gabrielle, yeah, who focuses on protein a lot and puts lots of emphasis on protein. She's not a carnivore by my understanding, but she understands the importance of animal protein. Walter, why do you believe that protein consumption is what's the cause of these early incidents of colorectal cancer and all these other negative heart health outcomes that you were just referencing, breast cancer? What in your right mind makes you think that? Is it epidemiology again? Is it epidemiology? Oh boy.
Very high protein diet. It could get a lot of people into early mortality.
Right, so you see that word could? It also could not. It really is that simple. Show us what evidence you're referencing, and we'll obliterate it.
Early disease.
Time magazine named Walter Longo as one of the 50.
Oh, I forgot this was a Plant Chompers video. I basically saved a bunch of videos into a catalog to react to. So they're on my computer. They're not on YouTube. Oh my. So yes, Chris McCaskill again. I just covered you, Chris. I just did. But we're going to hear more claims from you. Good. So another pseudo-epidemiologist, really. Well, no, another epidemiologist that believes that epidemiology is anything but really pseudoscience when it comes to the reporting of such. That's what we're in for. Get ready.
The most influential people in healthcare.
Who cares?
He invented the fasting mimicking diet, which has spread around the world.
Okay, so a diet that mimics the purported effects of fasting, so autophagy and lowering of I to G ratio and all that stuff. Okay, great. Is that indicated for our physiology at all, or is fasting once in a while, occasionally, indicated for our physiology?
Everyday people and to healthcare professionals. Dozens of
Fasting mimicking diet cycles versus a Mediterranean diet and cardiometabolic risk. Nope, not risk, because that's a cause and effect statement. And human nutrition science cannot inform upon causality. In fact, descriptive or inferential statistics can't do so outside of a hypothetical vacuum. So, nope, not risk. And cardiometabolic risk incidence in overweight and obese hypertensive subjects. Right, so can the results of these studies, or this study, be extrapolated to people that are not overweight and not obese and not hypertensive? The answer is no. They cannot. Not to mention, this puts into question if it's a randomized clinical trial. Good thing it didn't say controlled. which is actually still kind of implied when you say clinical, because anyway, okay, whatever. But if it's a randomized trial, then you have to look at the statistical power according to the sample size. You got to look at the signal to noise ratio or ratios for the random variables that were concerned in this study. You got to make sure that the signal to noise ratio is really conveyed or reported in the form of mean plus or minus SD, if normally distributed, median plus or minus MAD, if not mean plus or minus standard error, SE, because the standard error is completely inappropriate and irresponsible to be reporting, because if you knew anything about inferential statistics, you'd understand that that is only applicable in very, very specific circumstances, not in human nutrition science, when all of your cases are so fundamentally, starkly different from each other. Okay, so anyway, let's continue here, shall we?
Recent papers have been published in leading journals showing how effective it can be for.
No, not effective. That is an opinion, because effect is the conjugate of cause. And you didn't say how effective it may be, you said how effective it can be, which means that it's been proven, at least once, to have an effect. Okay, this is the consequence of thinking linearly as opposed to recognizing that the world, in terms of its activity, with respect to all of the variables involved, it exists as sort of a spiderweb net, a nexus, okay, with each intersectional point on that spiderweb representing a variable A through Z, or, if there's more than that, which there are, then A through whatever, variable 1 through infinity, and each line being bidirectional. So that's the consequence of that. The next one up here on the screen is early down modulation of tumor glycolysis, right? So, the breakdown of glucose for 2 net ATP in the cytosol through anaerobic anoxic processes. Good. Predicts response to fasting mimicking diet in triple negative breast cancer patients. Right, so very, very similar problems here. Early down modulation of tumor glycolysis predicts response to fasting mimicking diet. I'm not even actually sure what that means, but even if you're going to say predicts, what you're saying is that it is a predictor. It is not necessarily a causal influence. So, anyway.
Cancer and diabetes remission.
20 years ago, we started thinking about how can we keep all the benefits of calorie restriction and remove all the problems. And that's what.
All right, so a few things here. Calorie restriction, what he means by that is merely a reduction of the mass of food that you're consuming. It's important to make the distinction between mass and calories, or in other words, mass and energy, because as much as they're interconvertible mathematically, that doesn't really happen in the real world, and they are different currencies. So euros and pounds and dollars and New Zealand dollars and Australian dollars, okay, they're all able to be converted to each other, but you cannot bring one of those dollars up to a cash register in another country and expect them to be able to use that, or in some cases even recognize them. So no, the unit calories is not the same thing as the unit of mass in forms of grams, kilograms, whatever it may be. So you're talking about mass restriction. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because 400 calories of something it's up in the air in terms of what that is going to be in terms of the actual the amount of food you're consuming. Okay, 400 calories of carbohydrates is 100 grams of carbohydrates, and 400 calories of fat is what, 44.4 repeated grams, I think. 400 divided by 9. So if it's divided by 9, which is divisible by 3, you can expect some repeated numbers. Anyway, so that means that you're eating a different amount of mass of food, but your body only recognizes mass. It's mass balance, not energy balance in the body. Everything in the body remains mass. So that's important, because whenever they do these studies and it's like, oh, calorie restriction, oh, I'm eating. If you're eating fewer calories, you could actually be you could be eating more food. It's what all these low calorie recipes do. Oh, it's low calorie, but look at how much you're actually eating. Yeah, that's a problem, actually. Your body doesn't recognize the calorie. You don't yield calories from your food, from metabolic processes. It's not how that works. So that's one thing. And then also, just to touch on his little comment about diabetes. Diabetes is a disease characterized exclusively and explicitly as chronically elevated blood glucose and nothing else. The cause of type 2 diabetes, well, let's just put it this way. You will not see a bona fide instance of type 2 diabetes that does not involve carbohydrate consumption, almost ever. And I say almost ever because, sure, there might be a possibility that someone could be producing so much glucose in their own body that they're actually becoming diabetic. However, what I will say to that is that is typically going to be the case whenever you are chronically inflamed and there's something else going on, so it's still not the root cause. That would be sort of subsidiary. That would be an ancillary issue. So that's what I have to say about that. So when you talk about the fasting mimicking diet, well, does the fasting mimicking diet reduce carbohydrates, exogenous carbohydrates? Because if that's the case, well, that would explain the causal relationship if there is one.
The fasting mimicking diet came around. So
You have something that is a diet that mimics fasting, kind of tricks our.
Right. So the reason why this got popular is very obvious. No one wants to actually keep their mouths away from food, so instead what they do is they try and find shortcuts. And if there's something that can mimic fasting, when you but still be able to eat all day long, well, of course people are going to enjoy that. Enjoy the thought of that. So
Body into thinking we're fasting, and it does some remarkable things. Talk about that.
I wanted someone who could ask.
right. So here's patronizing Chris back at it again. Yeah. Anyway, go on, Chris.
Great questions, so I asked Stanford professor Tamako Katsumoto to help me interview him.
I've been a huge fan of Walter Longo's for a long time, and when approached with the opportunity to do an interview with him, I of course jumped at it. And I jumped on a plane from Stanford down to USC to do the interview.
who wants to be the one that changes the FDA?
We should talk offline.
Aging is by far the most powerful enemy when it comes to mortality, when it comes to diseases.
I challenge you.
Aging is troubling? Well, boy, do I have news for you, Walter. Aging happens, no matter what.
You come up with something that will change more gene expression in the body than fasting. Right? Nobody's ever even come up with something theoretically that could do that. Meaning, if you fast a person for, let's say, 5 days, it'd be hard to find something else that causes more changes in the body than those
That is associated with more changes in the body.
5 days.
He makes some bold claims, and we were looking for weaknesses.
Are you familiar with that paper?
You're getting interrogated here.
We didn't find holes in his science, but I found his weakness.
You've been thinking about that chocolate.
Oh, so you're like, with 100% chocolate, you're like I am with FMDs.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can't handle it. You can't
Exactly.
You can't handle 100%.
There is now additional benefits of the 100% compared to the 85%. My mission list has always been, how do you make people live to 110 healthy, right? And so we started with genetics, and it was important, many years ago, to set to understand the mechanisms, right? So what genes are controlling aging, are preventing cancer, preventing DNA damage. And 20 years ago, we started thinking about how can we keep all the benefits of calorie restriction and remove all the problems. And that's where the fasting mimicking diet came around. So can you fast people, mice first and rats, and then people for a few days, And would these effects last a long time? And will we get the same benefits as permanent calorie restriction, but avoid the problems? Most of the recommendation on diet are one pillar, sometimes half a pillar. They say epidemiological data, right?
There it is. He just said it. So I think that we can pretty much dismiss anything that this man has to say. I mean, yes, I suppose not everything, but that's a pretty egregious claim. As Chris said, a pretty bold claim.
Which is great. That's one of the pillars. But then we say you combine epidemiology with basic research. How do you make a mouse live longer? Then you combine it with clinical trials. Then you go.
Yeah, mice aren't humans, and the reason why I haven't been so, I haven't pounced on that as quickly as I do in other videos is because at least he is recognizing that you also have to test it on humans afterwards. He keeps saying that, so that's good.
Look around the world, Okinawa, Loma Linda, Southern Italy.
Yeah, tell us all about Okinawa and what they eat.
You know, how do the centenarians make it to that age? Or the mutants like we follow in Ecuador that have mutations in certain genes. You know, what are the genes and why do they live longer?
There are an estimated 200.
There are myriad factors that are involved when it comes to people's age and their lifespan. Yes, genes play a role. Genotype and phenotype, they play a role. What they do and what they don't do play a role. What they eat and what they don't eat plays a role. At the end of the day, the most effective thing that we can do is instead of looking at this science, which really isn't science at all, but theology, you can branch out in terms of where you are observing or what science you are observing, and you can refer to other hard sciences to basically infer what we ought to be eating as a species. Those include comparative anatomy, observational paleoanthropology, chemical anthropology, and certain elements of rudimentary biochemistry. You can look at that, and then you can sort of get some very, very, very weak support, or a cherry on top, I guess you could say, with certain randomized controlled trials, certain studies from cellular biology. Sure, fine, go ahead. And then from that, you say, okay, well, this is what we ought to be eating as a species, because last I checked, every single species, which we are one of, we are a species, has one diet for its speciation, irrespective of genotype, actually. And that goes for us as well. There is, it seems, very minimal variation. So some variation still because of the ubiquity of our species for the last 13,000 years. But really, when I say the last 13,000 years, it's not like our ubiquity went from the same as every other species, roughly, to 13,000 years ago, just what it is today. No, it was still, even then, gradual. So even that is nuanced. Instead of looking at epidemiology, which is flawed in so many ways, again, it's just theology at that point.
50 Lerone dwarfs worldwide. 1/3 of them live in the Loja province of southern Ecuador. The Lerone dwarfs share a rare genetic disorder that prevents the use of the normal growth hormone produced in the body. Dr. Guevara believes the defective gene that stunts their growth also prevents cancer and diabetes.
Yeah, so
Diabetes, once again, is chronically elevated blood glucose and nothing else. Your propensity for developing such a condition given certain stimuli can be up or down, depending on your genes, sure, but it doesn't mean that it fully prevents it. It means that you are influencing one influencer of the development of diabetes, because again, everything is nexial. It exists as a nexus. It's not linear. X goes to Y goes to Z. It's not like that. There are not very many effectors in the world. There are influencers in the world. Effectors are really only effectors in a vacuum, as I stated in the beginning.
Put it all together, and then you connect it with nutrients at the molecular level, and then I think that's where the longevity diet comes from.
I love all of the mechanistic stuff you figured out. You mentioned.
So mechanistic stuff that you figured out could mean that there are really, to give as much grace as possible, she is referring to him tying the results, or at least the associated results, of these interventions with plausible mechanisms, as opposed to the opposite, where you look at a mechanism and then you speculate according to that mechanism implications for diets that may or may not involve that pathway or something, which is actually completely irresponsible. So
Amino acids and certain other pathways in the sugar. What can you tell us what some of those key pathways are?
The major one coming out of the genetic studies has been growth hormone receptor, and then growth.
Right. So do you really want to interfere with growth hormone? Do you really want to do that? So basically what you're doing is you're looking at dwarves and you're saying, oh, wow, well, they have a defect in their growth hormone that causes them to be dwarves. But that's also associated, ostensibly, causally, with a reduction or an increase in lifespan. So therefore, we should manipulate our genes through gene therapy in order to live long that way. These people are spiritually sick, I think. Really. That is anti-human by definition. It is misanthropic. Your genes evolved for billions of years, millions of years in our speciation, if you include proto-humans that preceded our current speciation, that being Homo sapiens sapien. Okay. They know what they're doing. Let them be. What you ought to be doing is living an indicated lifestyle according to the Darwinian principles of evolution and the subsequent principles of indication. The prevailing scientific theory for a reason. It is still a theory, but it's been tried and true.
Hormone receptor feeding into three things: insulin, IGF-1, and mTOR. Some of the drugs.
Yes, insulin, IGF-1, and mTOR. Yeah. So what he's talking about is insulin growth factor 1, and mammalian target of rapamycin, which are involved in the growth process. There's some anabolism involved there. Yeah. Okay, great. Last I checked, all of that is very important. Growth is very important. Also, this gets into a discussion of longevity versus health span. Lifespan versus health span. Just because you might get an increase in lifespan, does that mean that is that at the expense of health span?
For example, that extend the lifespan of, rapamycin is one of the most successful drugs to extend the lifespan of a mouse.
Right.
But also,
well, are we mice?
acarbose, which is interfering with the sugar pathway. That's also one of the most successful ones, right? That network, sugar, amino acid, growth hormone receptor, IGF-1, insulin, and mTOR.
Right.
That seems to be fairly solid, right? And after 30 years of work, I think not too many people say, no, that's not at the center.
Okay, so here's another thing about IGF-1. Insulin and IGF-1 function and operate in lockstep with one another. You're not going to have high IGF-1 if you don't have high insulin. So now tell me, Walter, why do you think that protein is therefore something that you should restrict whenever protein's insulinogenic effects are highly dependent on the underlying glycemic status of the body, whether your blood sugar is high or low at the time of ingestion? In other words, what you should be restricting then is carbohydrates, if anything. Okay, you're not going to have high insulin and therefore high IGF-1 and therefore high mTOR activation if you're in a carnivore diet fed state, which is a higher protein diet.
Now there are different genes that have moved in, but they seem to all converge into that. I always show this slide where I show some of the organisms that have record longevity extension, and they're dwarf, right? The yeast that lives the long.
Right. So is that something that we should be doing then? Make ourselves dwarves, shut down our growth hormones, our growth processes, rather? Is that something we should do?
Longest is very small. The fly, they have a longest lifespan extension, are very small, and the mice, they have the record lifespan extension.
And the people.
And the people, now the people, certainly it's a little bit trickier. We follow these little people of Ecuador that have the same mutation as the mice that have record longevity. You have to go back in history. It's not so easy to.
Right. So again, you just mentioned an association. Is there anything else that could be influencing their lifespan? This is a theory. Once again, I'm trying to be as forgiving as possible here and say, okay, fine, you're right about that. Whenever I make my other arguments, which I've already done so. And that's my point. Even then, when I give you as much credence, as much forgiveness as possible, it still doesn't add up.
Figure out, you have to see when did their brothers and sisters die, right? And their brothers and sisters were heterozygotes. Right. So it's a very challenge. It's very difficult to determine, are they 10% longer lived? We haven't determined yet for people, but they seem to be living longer. So they're certainly much more protected against diseases, right, than people that don't have the mutations.
You see those words "seem to be protected against"? Again, this is associative. This is hypothesis generated. He hasn't said anything too offensive yet. I mean, believe it or not, that is my opinion at the moment. But besides the epidemiology being a pillar of health, that's wow.
But longevity-wise, it's not as easy to. We haven't demonstrated that yet.
So I guess
and you're not going to demonstrate that.
what I was thinking about then is with the growth hormone receptor mutants, it's the resistance to cancer, I think, was one of the phenotypes. Is that right?
They rarely develop cancer. Yeah. And now the good news is.
Oh, again, an association that you're drawing a causal link between. It is plausible mechanistic speculation, according to you, because plausible is a value judgment statement. Okay, the thing about cancer is that, yes, it metastasizes and it grows, and so it is associated with growth. In fact, I actually did a video breaking down a cancer article from 2021, getting into the really deep nitty-gritty details, the biochemical details surrounding cancer cells. I'll link that in the top right corner of the screen. But what it actually showed was that cancer cells tend to waste ATP, that they actually tend to form elements in the cells, in themselves, that actively waste more ATP. And a less ATP production, or a lowering of ATP production, and or a wasting of ATP production, or of ATP in the first place is what I really should say, is basically invariably associated with cellular proliferation. So the growth of new cells, which is interesting. I'm not entirely sure why, and neither were the scientists that wrote that article. They said that it could be because it needs more, for biosynthesis, it needs more precursors for that, like NAD and all that other stuff. But that doesn't really make any sense. How does that connect with ATP wasting? It really doesn't. It doesn't seem. It almost seems like the cell basically reverts back to its prokaryotic mechanisms. So it's like a catch-22. It seems that a slowing of the rate at which the mitochondria function is conducive to develop cancer. But then once the cancer cell develops and becomes actually cancerous, once the cell becomes cancerous, it seems to actually want to keep the mitochondrial function low in order to prevent as much ATP from being created. So it's like you're really stuck now. Once it goes cancerous, it's really hard to get out of that situation, it seems. Well, I mean, definitely. Um, it's odd, to say the least. Very odd.
The mice that had the same mutation,
Yeah.
they have about 40%, 50% decrease in lifelong cancer incidence.
Oh, wow.
That's been very important to us to say, yeah, the human data could be a coincidence, but it'd be a little strange coincidence considering all the model system and the mice that happen to live a lot longer and have health for the cancers, right? Same thing for diabetes. They're very much protected. People that have the
Not protected. It is an association with lower incidence rate, Walter.
autosomal receptor mutation very much protected from diabetes. And the mice, John Kopchick's work at Ohio University showing that they are very much protected against diabetes model.
No, not protected. Also, these are mice, not human beings. The ultimate irony with all of this is even if every single thing that he said right here already, that everything that he says regularly is correct, all this goes to show is that you want to have lower insulin. Insulin is the prototypical anabolic hormone. It's involved necessarily, like I said, with IGF-1 stimulation and activity, and subsequent mTOR activation. So get your insulin down, and what is the most insulinogenic macronutrient that isn't a macronutrient at all, which I did a video on as well, link in the top right corner of the screen as well for that. And the one that isn't required at all, hence why it's not a macronutrient and not something that we evolved to genotypically withstand in terms of a significant amount of the molecule being involved in the composition of your diet. Oh, it's carbohydrates. There is no exogenous requirement for carbohydrates in the human diet. Hence, exogenous. So,
Cognitive decline. We brought him actually here across the street, and we did functional MRIs. Just like the mice, they have a more youthful cognitive phenotype. So they seem to be performing much more like a 20-year-old than the relatives, which we also brought here, and they performing more like a 50, 60, 70-year-old cognitively, right?
So more constructs based on arbitrary criteria. Look, I understand the utility of constructs because constructs are a form of order in a realm of chaos. You can't have no boat in an ocean of chaos. You got to have something. So I understand it, but we must also recognize that it is a construct nevertheless, which can be noisy and exclusive and fallacious.
Yeah, so I think lots of the things that were shown for mice
Yeah.
are shown for people. And we just published the last paper. Everybody said
Normal or improved. Oh, well, no. Got to show it up on the screen for you. Normal or improved cardiovascular risk factors. Nope, not risk factors. Associative factors. We already covered that. In IGF-1 deficient adults. So do you want to be deficient in IGF-1? It's all about getting those extra years, right? It's all that matters, right? With growth hormone receptor deficiency. Right, okay, cool. So, I mean, really all this has to do with is insulin, doesn't it? Wow, okay.
yeah, maybe they're protected from diabetes, cancer, and cognitive decline, but maybe they have more cardiovascular disease. But it turns out they don't after spending a number of years and bringing cardiologists to equity.
Cardiovascular disease is caused by damage to arteries. So, yeah, why would they have heart disease via that mechanism being at play? That doesn't make any sense.
Or they turn out to have less plaques in the arteries, and overall they seem to be doing better, right? So just a single mutation that has this power of completely changing the disease phenotype.
Nope. So you've drawn a causal relationship because of your scientific arrogance, because you want it to be true. You've constructed a story in your head that makes sense to you, so therefore it must be true. because things that make sense and stories that are sound, well, they must be true. Yeah. Okay.
They never develop. I mean, after 50 or 60 years, I think in the first 50 years of following, one person died of cancer. And so many of them were in their 70s, 80s, never seen Alzheimer in any of them, right? And yet people in Ecuador have Alzheimer.
I love this pathway. It's so fascinating. Just thinking about growth hormone signaling and how important that seems to be. I'm so curious what your thoughts are. I know there's been a lot of studies on growth hormone, IGF-1, you know, and things that may raise that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we covered that. It's insulin. Get your insulin lowered.
This is probably something very fundamental, meaning that the growth and pro-growth, pro-reproduction, and the fact that everything is converging on these pathways probably has to do with making decisions, right? Entering different programs. So you can have a program where you're going to grow fast, have lots of offspring, and get out of the way, or you can have a standby program where you are blocking everything, blocking growth, blocking reproduction. So it makes sense in evolution. It is very clear if you look at a yeast or a bacteria. Bacteria and yeast enter stationary phase, right? In fact, if you look at yeast, they can do three things. They can be in the fast lane, right, and they live for a few days, or can be in stationary phase and they lower their metabolism. In the standby, they can go for weeks, or they can go enter what's called a spore state, and they can live for years, right? So
Right, okay, so Walter is basically telling us to not have too much offspring, so be infertile, basically, because I think what he's talking about is not to actively halt yourself or prevent yourself from trying to create offspring, but make it to where the organism really isn't doing that because of biological hindrances. So make yourself infertile or not desire to procreate. And he's talking about not growing too much, which would include muscle and all the other tissues that are important to have growth activity in. Good. So do you now realize why this is anti-human and just completely against nature? The natural order is really what I should say of things. This is like, if you're going to apply an archetype here, it's like Luciferian in a way. Anyway.
Between the shortest and the longest is 100-fold lifespan difference, right? So it's really remarkable. So that teaches.
100-fold sounds a lot more significant than it very well could be, considering that it is a relative outcome statistic. Cancer cells, if you didn't know, use 40,000% more glucose than normal cells when observed. Yeah, 40,000%, 400 times more. Yeah, it's a relative term.
You that, at least in some organisms, have a predisposed selection of 3 different programs, 3 days, 3 weeks, 600 days, right? Wow. That's probably why growth hormone works so well, because it's,
in your opinion,
it's not quite what we see in yeast, but it's like you could live like this or like that, where we.
Right. So again, you're basically telling people to not live in accordance with what is indicated and what has been indicated, or for millions of years as our species. So don't basically be docile. So docile, lacking in sufficient growth activity, because you may get an increase in lifespan for a few years. You do realize, Walter, that when you observe our genes, we have the capacity, even when living, particularly actually, when living an indicated lifestyle, which involves eating an indicated diet, which is a hypercarnivorous diet consisting of the flesh and associated fat of large ruminant animals primarily, added fat, because we're looking at an approximation given our modern context, in the forms of butter, tallow, lard, suet, and ghee, added salt to taste and water. Of about, we're capable of living to about 120 to 150 years of age, even within that context, which doesn't involve hindering growth activity biologically. So are you admitting basically that your diet makes people weak and docile and incapable of growth to the same degree that other people that aren't doing such a thing, they're eating the way that I eat, for example, and I suggest other people eat, can?
And exploit it is to say, well, we're not growing after a certain age.
Right.
Most people don't reproduce more than a couple times. So why are we spending all this energy being in this high reproduction, high growth mode?
Right.
We could just be in this maintenance mode.
Yeah.
Or you could just live an indicated lifestyle, Walter. Mr. Longo. Because it's what we are designed to do. Do you think it's actually a good idea to be what you're saying we should be in older years? Like, do people enjoy that? Is that really a good idea? Seriously.
And maybe live a lot longer, a lot healthier, right?
Maybe. Exactly. And do all this stuff and make yourself weak and docile. Because maybe you'll get a few extra years on your life. What?
So that switch is, I think that, especially if that switch is already, because you can biohack your way to longevity, but it's very difficult to do that and not cause damage.
Right.
But if
Well, so what makes you think that your approach is any different then?
something that is evolved for that purpose of protecting you when you don't need to reproduce or grow, then that's it. That's a switch, all right, once you find that switch. So growth hormone is probably one of those switches. But now the question is how early you have to switch it on. It may be that you have to switch it on fairly early.
Yeah.
And some of the other ones, like rapamycin and TOR, they don't seem to be that early because, you know, the studies that have been done in mice, they started at middle age. They started intervening with the drug middle age. So it means that at least TOR, blocking TOR is still effective even later. As a master switch.
Okay.
But growth hormone seems to be, at least the data suggests that you may have to intervene earlier to make the selection between lifespans.
So the dietary patterns that help with this growth hormone regulation, fasting versus longevity diet, like what are the impacts?
I mean, proteins, essential amino acids are the ones that are most powerful in keeping growth hormone high, in keeping IGF-1 high.
According to whom, on the basis of what? We already covered proteins' insulinogenic impacts on the body or influences and how they're dependent on underlying glycemic status, Walter. Now, there are independent mechanisms, I would suspect, that also are involved in growth, sure, whenever you consume protein, because protein is involved in muscle protein synthesis. But you do require insulin for amino acid administration into cells, nevertheless. So, anyway.
If you reduce protein levels, and particularly if you have plant-based proteins.
There we go. Wow. Particularly if you have plant-based proteins. I wonder why that is, Walter. Lack of bioavailability. Not to mention, and it goes hand in hand with lack of bioavailability, but also, could it be because of? Could it be because that a lot of these plant proteins are not even they're actually anti-nutrients like lectins? Could it be because of that as well?
Plant-based protein, like let's say the legumes, have much lower levels of these amino acids that are pushing growth factors, right?
That's interesting.
And so I mean, of course, you don't want to have, let's say, legumes have much lower. So you don't want to have only legumes because then you get too low. Because you could look at a 5-fold difference between levels in animal protein and a plant-based protein.
Okay.
So you probably want to be more on the side of the plant, but.
Oh, yes, because how long have we been consuming plants as a species over the course of the existence of our species. In what amount and in what circumstances? Rhetorical question. And not to mention, the plants that exist today, how often did we consume those? Oh, wait, well, it couldn't have been longer than 200 years, considering most of them didn't even exist 200 years ago, in the forms that they exist in today. So some of them didn't even exist in terms of like themselves. They didn't even exist. But if they did, their forms are completely different, far larger, far starchier, far sweeter in the case of fruit. Unbelievable, Walter. We didn't eat those. They're effectively man-made inventions that we've had no time to genotypically adapt to at all. You mentioned evolution earlier. Well, let's talk about positive and negative selection pressures and genotypic adaptations to stimuli. You want to be on the side of plants. What, in order to be docile and lack in growth potential? That's what you're admitting, right? Well, that's what you're saying. I mean, Walter, you do realize that Walter has just admitted to this, right? If everything he's saying is correct in the first place, which is a big, big, big if, it makes you docile and weak and incapable of growing as well. Good. So thank you for admitting that. And also, it seems to be the case that if you are exhibiting less growth, then you may live, longer. So that's your benefit. That's your benefit. Great. You know, what happens whenever you have very little muscle mass on your body? Could that influence your lifespan? Because, like, I don't know, about falls, for example. Can you protect yourself as well from falls? This is just unbelievable. I don't know how much more I could take, frankly. He's just saying the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, what I do respect is his humility. He seems to be humble. I mean, he's making arrogant claims, but I mean, overall as a person, he doesn't seem to be coming on too hard. He's not one of these people, but I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons why he's so respected and so beguiling. But no, what he's saying is a confession more than anything.
Which are the amino acids that you're thinking about that?
It's like leucine, methionine.
Oh, which are
right?
lower in plant. Some plants.
Well, not necessarily in plants.
Or legumes.
In legumes, like for example, nuts and seeds, they can have a fairly high level of. So plant-based.
Right, but that immediately still puts into question the bioavailability of those. You can make a rough estimation or a rough measurement of bioavailability of protein by measuring the nitrogen-containing byproducts contained in urine and fecal matter, and comparing that to the amount of nitrogen consumed as protein within that same time period, however long the duration of the study is. It's rough because, again, there's many influential factors always. There's still confounders. But whenever you do that, it seems that things like broccoli, things like soy, for example, the protein, we're talking about a bioavailability of extremely low quantities. In the same study I'm referring to, I believe that beef was actually less bioavailable than egg protein. But again, it's highly dependent. You can't make any call. You can't then say, well, eggs are then more bioavailable than beef. Like, it completely depends on the person and their current circumstances at that time. So
Proteins, they have fairly high levels of these amino acids, but some plant-based proteins have very low, right? So you have.
Yeah, well, once again, we're talking about the absolute concentration or amount of protein and not comparing that as well to the bioavailability of it. Bioavailability, once again, depending highly on circumstances as well. I mean, how much protein are you actually going to absorb when you aren't exercising as much, for example? When you eat the same amount of protein every day, if you were to, will you absorb the same amount every single time?
You have to know, and you have to mix them to get, say, in between, right? Because you don't want to go to the levels of animals, because then you get the problems that the animal proteins cause.
Wow. Wow. You don't want to go to the animal proteins because then you get all the problems that are associated with animal proteins, and not just associated, but that they cause. Unbelievable, Walter. You have no idea what you're talking about.
But you also don't want to be malnourished.
Yes.
Because now you have so little that
Yes.
that could, cause the opposite problem.
You don't want to be malnourished, but eat a plant-based diet. Eat my fasting mimicking diet that is fully plant-based. Oh boy. Wow, Walter. Lost in the weeds, he is.
So we're talking about amino acids that alter growth hormone signaling, right? But
That are associated with an alteration in growth hormone signaling. They very well may be involved directly in the chemical processes. However, I'm highly skeptical of that because I understand that insulin is responsible for administering amino acids into cells.
what about animal proteins themselves, especially in these factory farmed animals? Where are they getting growth hormone exogenously? Is that also playing into some of these results we're seeing that could be impacting?
The only time that a hormone is going to have a hormonal effect on you, or at least a hormonal influence, once again, is if that hormone is digested and absorbed into the bloodstream in its full form and not broken down into individual molecules for use by the body. By the way, that's very important to understand.
Growth hormone is probably going to be difficult to absorb, right? So,
There you go.
but some of the steroid hormones, they could be absorbed, right? So,
Okay.
yeah, a lot of the protein-based hormones are probably not going to make it through.
They'll get degraded.
They get degraded, yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Some others will not get degraded. They could definitely contribute to lots of problems. So that's
Potentially. So does that have any bearing on the quality of, does it have any bearing on the indication level of animal products in the human diet? Or does that have implications when it comes to the way that we raise animals now and distribute and the quality of the animal products we distribute?
something that we always wanted to investigate. We never got around to, but it's a very interesting topic. What animals get fed,
Exactly.
and how that is that, whether it's antibiotics or hormones.
Yep.
Yep. Now let's talk about how plants are raised as well, how they are cultivated. All the pesticides and herbicides grown on completely depleted soil in terms of its nutritional content that also contributes to more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because there's less sequestration going on from healthy soil. So that's a result of monocrop farming on a large scale and reusing the soil over and over and over again without replenishing it with organic matter from ruminant animals. So that's a problem. So yeah, right back at you. By that logic alone, does that have any bearing on the indication level of plants? Nope.
How is that going to affect somebody that, especially somebody that consumes a lot of it?
Yep.
And
Right. Yeah. Okay. So good. Here's the other thing. It's quite rare nowadays to have antibiotics in animal products. Almost all of it is antibiotic free.
And I think in addition, thinking about, like even dairy products, right? I mean, these are pregnant cows that are pumped up. I mean, their blood is coursing with hormones. A lot of these.
So what? What is the association between milk and dairy consumption and adverse associated negative heart health outcomes that seem to be related to hormones in milk? Genuine question. I'd be concerned if this were an actual concern. I really would be. Doesn't mean don't consume dairy. It just means be careful with where you source it. Okay. If those antibiotics were or rather if those hormones were introduced exogenously, if they were introduced endogenously, produced endogenously by the animal, like she's referring to, then Again, it just puts into question the association. What is the association? How reproducible is that association? What are the strengths of the associations? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay? And I don't think milk is causing you estrogenic problems or anything like that, or fat gain problems. I think what's actually going on is that you've got more estrogenic activity in a plant-based vegan community for obvious reasons.
Right, estrogens, etc.
Tell us all about estrogens and estrogenic influences and effects on the body from meat and animal products. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. So all the hormones that can make it into the bloodstream.
Which puts into question how much actually gets administered into the blood, gets absorbed into the blood. And what happens afterwards. But really, how much of it is absorbed? In all circumstances.
Of whoever consumes them. That should be a major concern, right? Then
well, in your opinion?
We should know a lot more about it and should be a lot more regulated. So that,
totally,
of course.
Well, yeah, so again, when it comes to hormones, putting aside, the dairy, most animal products don't have hormones in them anymore. They're not allowed to. So what's your point?
You don't inherit whatever is being given to the animals.
I mean, the other thing, I'm sure you've thought about this, I've been thinking about it a lot, but just the whole concept of bioaccumulation. There are persistent organic pollutants, there are other things that tend to accumulate, they're fat soluble, right? Lipophilic compounds that tend to go to fat tissue. And so that's another component I've been thinking about. When you're eating a lot of these animal products that are higher in fat, are you also getting a lot of these other
Right, okay. That's actually a valid concern, which is why we also prioritize grass-fed and grass-finished. It's not to say that grain-fed is necessarily bad. I would be careful with the monogastric animals particularly, but ruminant animals are quite good and quite adept at the filtration of those compounds compared to monogastric animals. Doesn't mean they're perfect at it. Which is why, yeah, you just buy grass-fed and grass-finished if you have the ability to. Buy from a local farm. That's what I've been doing for a few months now. Regenerative farm. I have to drive an hour to and back, but so be it.
Toxins and things that we may not want to be consuming.
The animal products.
Again, this is all just a way to cast aspersions at animal products when it has nothing to do with animal products. Vegans do this all the time. Oh, well, look at the way the animals, these poor animals, are raised and treated in these industrial factories. Yeah, do you think I support that? No, it's a false dichotomy. You either support that or you go vegan. No. You can do, well, look, you can be opposed to that and also eat animal products from a regenerative farm that doesn't treat their animals that way. Okay? It's that simple.
Have a double problem, right? So they have that plus the other problems.
Yeah.
But the
What problems, Walter? You haven't gotten into any of them.
plant-based products also have the problem, right? I always
Good job.
say, for example, you can have brown rice and it contains arsenic, right? Now,
Yep. Why does it contain arsenic? Almonds contain cyanide. Why do they contain cyanide? Is it because plants are toxic? Now, you'll struggle to find a more objective figure in this space than me, I would posit. And so, what I want to say is that just because plants do have toxins in them, that's not an argument on its own to say, well, then plants are really bad for us and we shouldn't be consuming them. And the reason for that is because if that were the case, then there would be no such thing as an herbivore. There would be no such thing as an herbivore at all, or even an omnivore, would there? What matters is how long we ate those plants, How long did we eat those plants? That's really the question. How long? And, well, I think we covered that in the beginning, didn't we? Like, no time at all. We're not evolved. Look into oxalate dumping. Look into the skeletal malformations that happened directly following the agricultural revolution. The crooked and missing and rotting teeth. The shortening and shrinking of the robustness of our skeleton. The problems with the formation of the top of the skull, the occiput. Yeah, look into the fact that we have an appendix and can't digest fiber, therefore. Look into our efficiency for gluconeogenesis genotypically across our genome. Over sufficient adaptation, of course. With respect to duration. Basic stuff.
There's new data on plant proteins having high levels of lead. I'm not so
Right. Well, a lot of that, again, yes, it has to do with industrialization, to be fair.
crazy about having teams, right? You know, like I'm on the plant team and I'm on the animal team.
Yeah.
I think we should be more like, there's problems everywhere, and way more problems with the animal because of, you know, what they contain and also the consequence on the environment, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh yeah, the consequences of on the environment. Yeah, because the vegan diet is actually what's really beneficial for the environment. Plant-based diets are really beneficial for the environment. Yeah, absolutely. Mass monocrop agricultural farming, that's really great for the environment. That's really great for greenhouse gas sequestration, carbon dioxide sequestration. Definitely. That's really great. The billions of insects and the millions of small animals and rodents, in terms of their deaths. Those are really good for the environment because, of course, they don't mean as much because they're not bigger animals. And the bigger, the more valuable, absolutely. The more human-like, the more valuable. Yeah. The more that we relate to them, the cuter they look. Yeah. On a broad level. Yeah, that's great for the environment. Having the apex predator of the universe, that being human beings, become docile and weak and placid and apathetic and anhedonic. Yeah. All of that. That's really great for the environment. It's really great for the environment, isn't it? Having us become stupider. That's great for the environment. The deforestation that's involved in the production of plant-based agriculture. That's really great for the environment. Having no regeneration of soil and replenishment of soil quality because of no ruminant animals on the soil. That's really good for the environment. Chastising cows for producing methane, which doesn't actually contribute to more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because it's part of the carbon cycle, which you learn in kindergarten. Yeah, that's really good for the environment. Ramping up the amount of industry that is required to actually, but to power plant agriculture, to power the farming, the mass farming of plants. Yeah, that's really good for the environment. No, we can keep going, but unbelievable.
Yes.
So fine, but then we shouldn't make it that the plant-based sources are perfect because they're not, right?
No, they're far from perfect. They're not indicated at all. In fact, they're quite contraindicated. If you've made it this far and haven't bought this book already, you're making a mistake. You've made a mistake. Buy now. Link in the description below for second edition in paperback, hardcover, ebook, and self-narrated audiobook version because I'm all about authenticity. So anyway, Walter, what's next?
And they have a lot of problems, yeah. So I think it's important.
They actually have a lot of intrinsic problems, not just extrinsic problems.
Soon we come up with food purity standards, because everything is so contaminated. And I always say, one thing that I always recommend is rotation, right?
Yeah.
Rotate. Don't eat the same things more than once or twice a week.
No, that's ridiculous. That is completely unfounded. That is just theology. That's ideology. That's religion. Okay? Eat red meat every single day. And nothing else.
Because so many things are contaminated.
Yeah.
And if you keep eating the same thing, let's say brown rice, eventually you might get arsenic poisoning, right? So
okay, so as a result of our modern context, you say to switch the foods you're eating around, the plants you're eating, because plants aren't food for human beings. Interesting. Okay.
this is true for so many things, and people shouldn't think, oh, I cannot eat anything. No, you can, but just some
moderation.
Rules can protect you.
Moderation is a relative term. It doesn't really mean anything. That's up for the individual to decide what that means. The ultimate irony here now is that the least contaminated foods is grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively farmed ruminant meat. It's not plants. Even organic plants are sprayed with pesticides so long as those pesticides are considered organic. So
from getting toxic levels of lots of things.
Well, I always think about detoxification diets, and they're all plants, right? Like the thing.
Wow, and you do realize that plants contain and harbor many toxins that they created themselves to discourage predation. Predation, in their perception, literally being their consumption. Effectively. The reason that grass releases that smell when it's mowed is because of that.
Like the sulforaphanes that are in broccoli and...
Right, you mean the things that kill cells outright through oxidation and don't discriminate based on cancer cells or regular cells? You mean sulforaphane and isothiocyanate that competes for iodine in terms of its absorption by the thyroid. They're called goitrogens for a reason, because they influence the development of goiter mechanistically.
Cruciferous vegetables that are helping our liver to detoxify these things.
No, they're not helping your liver to detoxify anything, ma'am. So I was waiting for this to happen. If anything, you've got molecules like piperine found in black pepper that directly inhibit the liver's stage 2 detox pathways, which is precisely why it enhances curcumin absorption from turmeric. Have you ever wondered why turmeric is sold with black pepper oftentimes? It's literally because when your body encounters the consumption by yourself of turmeric, which contains the molecule curcumin, it recognizes curcumin as a toxin when absorbed, and so it is filtered through the liver. In order to stop that from happening, because of curcumin's purported anti-inflammatory effects, they tell you to take it with black pepper, because black pepper contains piperine, which literally shuts down the stage 2 detox pathways in your liver, chemically speaking. It's like putting something in someone's mouth, and when they want to go spit it out because it's bad for them, you force your hand over their mouth and you force them to swallow it. That is literally what you're doing. That should put things into perspective for you. Piperine isn't sulforaphane, but that's not the point. These are plant toxins. You do realize that sulforaphane is released only whenever a plant is cut.
Fiber is helping us to excrete things.
Oh my God. Wow. Fiber is another contraindication in the human diet. You know how I know that for a fact? Can we digest it? Nope. I think we're done. I think we're done. Last I checked, if you can't digest something, you shouldn't be eating it. And every single animal that has any significant amount of fiber in their diet actually has the ability to ferment that fiber through a digestive process in a cecum into volatile fatty acids, and actually in a way that creates amino acids for them to build muscle. That's how a gorilla has so much muscle. It's not because they eat a bunch of protein. It's because their bacteria in their gut ferment fiber into amino acids for absorption and for muscle protein synthesis for use. Our cecum is very small now and has an appendix attached to it, which is really a vestige from a past cecum that we used to have whenever we were frugivores, which we do have a frugivorous past. It's why we have their teeth. We don't have a carnivore's teeth, or a typical colloquially considered carnivore's teeth, sharp and pointy teeth like a cat or dog. We have different teeth. It doesn't mean we're not carnivores, but it means that we don't have traditionally carnivorous teeth in terms of what is conceptualized colloquially. Of course not. Of course not, if you actually understand evolution. Fiber is highly associated with increased mucus secretion in the gut. And when mucus is secreted in high amounts, when its production is upregulated, it happens whenever abrasions happen or irritation happens to the tissue. Yeah, it causes microabrasions to the gut lining because you can't digest it. There's really only two associated factors when it comes to diverticulosis, which is an outpouching or breaking down of the distal colon, which can lead to infection and early death if left untreated. Diverticulitis, which is increased number of bowel motions per day and increased fiber intake. Those two things being tightly intertwined, because the more waste you eat, the more waste you excrete. That's how that works. Not to mention when she says, "Oh, well, fiber is helping us clear things out." Fiber is an anti-nutrient. Not only is it an abrasive material, so it's actually causing harm, it is also an anti-nutrient. Soluble fiber makes a gel in your gut and actually strips nutrition away from you in that gel. It is stripping nutrition away from you. We actually know for a fact it does that. That's what it does. So, you want to be eating fiber? And all the benefits that are purported to be benefits from fiber, which, by the way, one of which is mucus secretion or something. It's so stupid. So unbelievably stupid. But one of them is, it ferments into short-chain fatty acids. It ferments into butyrate. One of the two primary ketone bodies that is produced in a ketogenic state, so whenever you're not consuming carbohydrates, is beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is used systemically, not just in a very focal part of the small intestine, which is what the former does, because it's fermented in the small intestine, the ileum. So, not to mention that it also seems to ferment into nasty byproducts like aldehydes, which even in vastly small concentrations destroy lipid rafts, tear some membranes to pieces, bind to DNA, and actively cause mutations to it, so it perhaps has implications in carcinogenesis. And in a high enough concentration, actually just kills cells outright. It may even ferment into alcohol, by the way. I believe I read something about that. So, hey, you do what you like, but there are no deficiency diseases that have ever been observed over the amount of time that observations have been done on the populations that have been studied due to fiber abstention that are associated. There's no associations with deficiency diseases and fiber abstention. So we're done, okay? We're not designed to eat fiber. All right? Peristalsis still happens without fiber. Why do you think carnivores do not die of constipation?
You can look at it like that, or you
Yeah,
can look
yeah.
at the opposite way. You can
Yeah.
say, the tomato skin, it could be pro-inflammatory. They put
There you go. Wow. So Walter is actually a very unbiased figure, it seems. I mean, I think his conclusions are quite warped, but and he seems to think that epidemiology is something that should be trusted.
Potato skin could be pro-inflammatory. So many, the fruits, a lot of them have inflammatory components. The seeds in tomato, the seed in food. I'm from southern Italy. I mean, my parents and my grandparents from southern Italy. And in the old days, there were a lot of rules and seasonality. So people knew you eat this fruit at this time of the year in these doses.
Wow, Walter is actually one of the more sensible ones in the plant-based space, which is, I mean, it's a low bar, but so he understands the seasonal factors here. Okay.
So now we're losing all of that, right? And there's no more,
Right.
let me teach you the correct way to eat this in the moment.
Yeah, you know, it's also important to understand and remember that before you ever had beans, for example, you would soak them for hours upon hours. Why do you think we did that? You would also take the skin off of tomatoes. You would take the skin off of potatoes. You take the skin and the exterior off of everything. Japanese people, they would take the hull off of rice, so it wouldn't be brown rice, it would be white rice. You'd actually eat the starch. They knew that plants had most of their toxins in their exteriors, not their interiors, but their exteriors. Not to mention that even after that, pressure cooking was a thing. Cooking intensely was a thing. They would do this regularly to mitigate the toxicity. The only reason why they even ate those foods in the first place was because of it being ingrained in their culture after centuries, millennia really, of consumption. We must remember why we started the agrarian revolution. It wasn't because we thought, wow, these are going to be yummy, grains and seeds and beans. No, it was because we had to, because of the extinction of the megafauna. Animals became more scarce. It was a genius decision on our part. What was not genius was us forgetting why we started to do that in the first place. For 1,000 years, we may have done that and then went, oh, wait, yeah, let's actually eat meat again, because the only reason we started eating these plants was because of extinction. We also found that they were highly resistant to, rotting and spoilage, I suppose you could say. And so that also helped us. In fact, it's one of the reasons why the agrarian revolution helped with humans' ubiquity across the planet. Because now you could be more certain, okay, well, I can grow this and grow a lot and it won't go bad. It's more shelf stable, right? So they have their utility during famine, but do you really want to subsist on famine food in a time of surplus? It's not a good idea. But no, then there was a bunch of theology that surrounded it, like, oh, well, actually, these are hearty and great for you. Actually, you should eat this. No, it was really just culturally ingrained, and now here we are. Okay, look, I'm not angry at the fact that plants, like, I'm not silly enough to believe that plants don't have any utility and didn't in the past. They did. It's actually a great thing that we have the ability to consume plants without immediately succumbing to death because of what we've done to them. Okay? But tools have specific uses. Those are subsistence tools. That's what we need to understand.
And when you're going to pick it, of course, again, with the animal-based products is a huge concern. But
no, it's not a huge concern at all. That's your opinion.
Also with the plant-based products, there are issues we need to be very knowledgeable of to make sure that people don't go from one problem to the other.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about plastics, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So let's maybe shift back. I don't know, Chris, do you want to jump in?
So I have a
You know what? I did a video on Chris just a little while ago, and so now that he's going to interject, I really don't think that I can take his patronizing, feigned humility, even for 1 second. In fact, hearing just that small bit of his voice right there, I just felt, my chest tighten, my heart just sort of feels strained. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do myself and you the favor of just stopping the video at this point. I mean, the video itself, we got 17 minutes and 36 seconds into it, but the entire video is an hour and 38 minutes long. It is a massive interview with Walter Longo that I have no interest in watching the entirety of. Walter Longo seems to be more sensible than others. However, that is within the confines of a plant-based community, and so the bar is quite low. I would really, really, really enjoy having conversations with people that even are plant-based but aren't ideologues, aren't ideologically driven, aren't inane morons as well. I mean, that's always a plus. But it's very, very, very rare. Um, and not something that I think is even a thing. I really don't. I mean, Walter seems to be the closest I've ever seen to that. Having conversations with these people about science and what it can and can't inform upon, and them being open to being carnivore, and me being open to being animal based. I would never be open to being plant based or vegan at all. But I mean, I'm more open to the idea of animal based. Not to say that I believe it at all, and not to say that I really have any confidence in that whatsoever. I'm just saying, of a spectrum of open mindedness, I would be more inclined to go animal based and omnivorous again than I would be to go plant based and vegan. But anyway, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to me if you haven't already. If you haven't done that already, I'm not quite sure what you're doing at all. I see you. I see you. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below as well. And once again, buy my book, Contrainidicated, a closer look and revision of mainstream health axioms that have perpetuated illness, disorder, and disease for over a century. If you have not bought that book already. And also subscribe to the Patreon as well if you haven't already to gain access to 1 week early uploads, ad-free content, uncensored content, loads of antiquated videos from before I was ever a public figure, loads of Patreon exclusive uploads whenever I was doing that sort of thing, whenever I was uploading an exclusive video to Patreon once a week, and also an exclusive Discord server for my tier 3 members if you're interested in getting access to that. And also, finally, the link on the bottom of the screen. What is that link? Well, that is a link that will bring you to an amazing site with amazing products from an amazing brand known as Cerule. If you purchase products through that link, you will get a permanent percentage and permanent free shipping discount when signing up for monthly deliveries. And if you email me behind the scenes at edgoki@pm.me, I can tell you how to earn those products for free. Because who in their right mind wouldn't want that? But of course, before buying any of these products, any product at all, actually, I wouldn't recommend doing that at all whatsoever until you learn more about them. So do not buy these products, these ones in particular, and also this one, and also my Stem Enhance Ultra is in the other room. First, refer to the link at the top right corner of the screen, the Cerule Products video, which is a complete video elucidation and explanation of what these products are, who should take them, why you should take them, when to take them, etc., etc. And also further migrate to the description below to find a video that I did on these products in further detail, as well as the company of Cerule itself, which I think is incredibly important if you are willing to make a contribution towards the company via a purchase. So with that being said, join me next time when we are reacting to more plant-based propaganda, some aspersion casting at animal products based on complete pseudoscience, also known as, I don't know, in this case, epidemiology, but also inferential statistics, a complete misreporting of descriptive statistics, whatever it may be. So, till then.